I wanted to bake a cake.
I never get it.
We are going to bake a cake. So I'm going to model the cake and then use procedural textures, and then we're going to bake those textures to actual images so we can take it into Godot, if that's something that you're interested in doing. Because people were asking about it yesterday because it was Sunday afternoon and they wanted me to make a tutorial for them.
They asked a few days ago.
A few days ago, I've been busy.
Wait, sorry. Is this motion design?
On the weekends, I sleep in till 8 a.m.
But this was for web design.
I know, it's for web design, but it's helpful for other purposes too. And stop calling it web design. It's UI UX now.
Oh my.
I'm going to delete this.
I was working on my planetarium thing and it made me motion sickness.
Do you have a VR headset?
I sold mine because it made me throw up once, but
Yeah, I'm not into VR.
it's like Quest 2.
Yeah, I feel like that's the case with a lot of people.
It doesn't appeal to me that much. It's like, okay, I guess you can be in the game, but I don't.
What if for open house we have all the people who come in to the VR headset because they get sick and they have to apply.
That's part of joining the program is you have to we pull up the thing that'll make everybody sick in the VR headset, and if they don't puke, you're in.
Yeah.
Wait, I think that's how the military
Yeah, I
works.
think it's like pepper spray test.
The pepper spray test, yeah.
Military, graphic design, totally the same thing.
Yeah, I could never handle the military because I'm just not good with authority. All right, let's do something here. I'm going to make a circle because I'm just going to make a cake. All right, so 64, and I don't know how I'm going to make this cake. So I've got a mesh circle, and then I go into edit mode. Then I hit F to fill it. Then I'm going to hit E to extend it out and just make a cake. It's going to be a super simple cake. Okay, don't expect much from this cake. It's dry. It's overcooked. It's from a box. I didn't mix the ingredients myself.
You know, it's like the Walmart $5 cakes and all that. Like,
It's the Walmart $5, like it's not even Betty Crocker.
yeah.
It's not even that.
Quote
No.
unquote pound cake.
Yeah, it's just sugar and flour. Let's make another circle on top. I do have a notion about how I want to make this cake though. I'm just going to take this face right up here that's at the top, and I'm going to duplicate it, Shift D, and then I'm going to separate it, P. So that way it's a separate object right here. Then I can go into edit mode on that, select that face, and extend that out. So I'm just making some like frosting that'll be dripping on the sides, something along that line. And after it's made, I'll just scale it up a little bit, S for scale, and maybe move it down a little bit. And then let's take individual faces. Let's turn off this, let's call this the cake. Let's call this one the icing. And then let's turn off the cake for a moment. Let's select the bottom of the face here. Let's inset that ever so slightly. And then inset that again. And then let's turn the cake back on. And let's select individual faces randomly.
I guess that you were going to do that.
The drippy kind?
But
You guessed that I was going to do what?
no, I guess you were going to make your drips with that method.
Oh,
In my head though.
good job. Can you anticipate what I'm going to do next?
No, you're going to extrude it down.
Good job. All right, so let's extrude some of those down. E, pull those down. And then let's just randomize it a little bit, have some move up.
What was the hotkey for, is that extrude manifold? Or what? How do you extrude the opposite?
How to extrude what?
How do you go back?
I'm not extruding, I'm just hitting G for grab, and I'm just hitting GZ to move it on the Z axis. Watch my screencast keys down here. You'll see what I'm doing. G, Z. Don't talk, just watch. I'm just kidding. You can ask questions at any time, Haley.
No, I don't want to because the last time I was watching there were too many long pauses.
When this is on YouTube, it's harder to ask me questions because it's on YouTube. but you're here in real life. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So after we make this, what am I going to do next, Haley?
Make it. So,
That's right. Thank you, not Haley. So it's kind of drippy. It's not real great. What we can do here, we need another loop cut up here. So let's go back into edit mode, select this face, and hit I to inset that. And then that'll make it look a little bit healthier. Inset that a little bit too. Looks a little better. And then maybe scale the whole thing down a bit so it's dripping a little bit more like that. So some of you might be tempted to like do a fluid sim or something like that, but if ever you can fake it, that's always better. And then let's save this. Save as. Let's call this, let's put a new folder in here and call it Wegmans. Definitely not going to call it Chartwells. Cake Boy. Version 01. Okay, so we got a cake. Let's go over to shading. And something about this, I'm trying to keep it low poly because I want to take it into Godot. So I could subdivide it more and everything, but if I look at my scene statistics down here right now it's only made out of 7,000 faces. I'm going to try to keep it around that because it's just a simple prop. So let's come back over here. Let's see, let's set up the cake. I'm going to make a chocolate cake. So we'll just make a sort of a brown color. All right, so simple brown color, but it's too smooth, right? So let's add some noise. Let's add a noise texture. Let's add a displace texture. Not displace texture, but rather a displacement node. Plug displacement up to displacement. And then plug distance. And if we want to see this before we do this, let's just plug the distance up to the base color so we see what this texture actually looks like. So we see that's what the distance texture looks like. And we have these different noise algorithms here. If we choose smooth, that's what that looks like. If we choose F2, that's what that looks like. What I'm trying to do is just make that a sort of texture of a cake that looks like the icing's been smeared around on it, but I'm just going to use bump maps. I don't want to use actual geometry displacement because that would require more geometry, and I'm trying to keep it low poly. So let's mix that with something else here. Let's mix that with some noise. So we'll go to texture, noise texture, and plug that up to the scale. And you can just play around with this until you start to see something that you might like. What I'm looking for is just something that is like kind of a smeary sort of texture here. And you might need to like color correct it a little bit. So if I go to converter, color ramp, and plug that in, we can probably make that signal a little bit stronger so we can see it a bit better. So I'm just trying to mix that together. And then instead of using that as the color, we'll use this as the, what do you call it, the displacement. So I'll disconnect it from here and then mix that over to the height here and then displacement here. And so maybe turn down the roughness and make this displacement not nearly as strong, like 0.2 or 0.1. So it's a much more subtle chocolate cake. And again, I'm only trying to get like the shadows and the lighting and so forth. It's not going to look as hyper real as it would if I'm going to make a 3D render for like a still, but rather I'm trying to make an asset for a game. So keep things simple, keep things low poly, and I'm really not doing this in the full intense way where you would separate the normal map from the diffuse map or albedo map, as well as the displacement texture, and then also the roughness texture, making it super simple. So if you want to tweak any of these signals in here, we can change the roughness, and you'll see how, depending on what I'm doing here, how that changes the nature of this look to it. Change the roughness here. Whatever looks good to you. All right, and then we'll call this cake. And then let's do the icing. What color should the icing or this whatever this stuff is on top?
So I like it being white.
You like it being white?
Yeah.
Let's make it red. No?
Neon.
You have
Blue.
the pink feels like it always goes.
Neon.
Although it's like kind of like a baby pink.
There you Is that all right? Let's right click, shade smooth. Okay. And you can play around with the roughness of that, but again, if you want something to be shiny in a game engine, you have to make it shiny in the game engine. Right now we're just trying to set up shadows and diffuse. And if you wanted to add a little bit more texture to that, you could. If we come back over here and just copy these nodes, and then come over here and just paste in those nodes. I know I copied all of these guys. Thank you. And then we plug this up, plug this in. This will be too much. So let's just change this nature here, change the scale here. Just want something a little bit subtle. There we go. So it's not just a flat, straight color. Okay? If you wanted to add other things to it, like cherries or whatnot, every time you add geometry to it, this number goes up. And so treat this geometry like golf. We want it as low geometry as possible. Yep. Is that why you put up your hand?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
This morning in class, we learned this thing called revolve and rhino.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
Oh, but how do you do that?
You've had the 3D class, haven't you?
Yeah.
Do you remember how we made a cup?
Oh, yeah.
The screw modifier. It's the exact same thing.
Oh,
In other software, they call it revolve, but we call it screw. So whenever you're learning Rhino, Maya, or any other software, remember it's just like driving a Ford versus a Chevy, right? They all have steering wheels, they have gears, they have brakes, they have gas. They just might do it slightly different. In cars, it's those main paradigm things are always in the same place, but things might change. You know, different cars might have the gear shifters. A Chrysler has a gear shifter way up here for some reason. Who drives Chryslers besides grandmas? Yeah. Okay, a Chrysler Cordoba, rich Corinthian leather. Okay, so this is what it looks like rendered right now, and I'm going to switch my renderer to cycles. The reason I'm switching it to cycles is you can't bake with Eevee. And let's change my world lighting so we have a sky, or you can set up a studio set if you want. I'm also going to make sure I'm rendering with the GPU, and so it's a bit faster. Going back to the world settings, I'm going to turn off sun disk because that's a bit too bright. And I'm going to put the sun on top of the world here, so I'm just going to increase the sun elevation. You set the lighting up wherever you want, but when we bake textures, the shadows will appear on the texture. So we don't want like one side to be lit and the other side not. I just want more of a diffuse, complete lighting on my cake.
why are you making the texture?
Because these kind of noise textures do not come over to Godot. And I want that noise texture to be in my game. Okay? And so in order for that to happen, or for other things, another reason you might want to bake textures is it renders faster. But one of the things about baking textures is in a game engine, the more individual graphics that you have in your game, the slower the game will run. So a goal is to always have as minimal number of graphics that the game engine is asking for. And so to that end, we would be tempted to have a graphic just for the icing and a graphic just for the cake. But what I want to do is bake them both to one texture. And you can see with this kind of lighting, the color is kind of washed out. So I might want to increase the saturation on that. And increase the saturation on this guy too. Just so we get all the color on there. And we can affect it later on in Photoshop after we bake the texture if we want to. All right, so save often. Now, here's what we want to do. We want to bake this texture onto a new texture. And this process in Blender has not changed since the 2000s. And it's a clunky process, and you have to watch close. because it's a secret that took me a long time to figure out. And you know what? I'm still trying to figure it out sometimes. It's weird. But what we need to do is create a blank texture that Blender bakes into. But the way you bake into it is not intuitive. It doesn't have a specific thing that says bake into this texture. It depends on what you have selected, both in the viewport and what you have actually selected here in the shader nodes. And before shader nodes, I can't even remember how we did it. So anywhere on either texture, either the icing or the material, or the, let's make sure we name these, icing, cake. All right, I'm going to create a new texture, a new image texture, and it's going to be a blank one. So I'm going to hit new, and I'll call it baked 1. Let's call it 01. And I'm going to make that texture 2048. 1024 is okay, but if you had a lot of detail in it, you might not see, you might see pixelization based on what I'm going to try to do later into this bake. So I'm going to hit new image. So now there's an image in the RAM of the computer, just in the memory. It's not saved to disk, and it's called baked 01. If we want to see that texture, over here in the texture viewer here, I can just load it in, baked 01, and it's just black, because that's what kind of image I chose to be. It was just a black image. All right, and so I'm just going to copy that texture into the icing node as well. Just paste it in. All right, notice it's not connected to anything. This is why it's not intuitive. I select it here, then I come back over here, and I make sure it's the active node. Notice how it's got a white border around it when it's the active node. It's the selected node. This one is selected as well. All right? So what I want to do is bake these textures to this texture and this texture to this texture. The problem is you need an image coordinate system for this to happen. And because I modeled these from circles, there isn't a UV map there already. If I look at either of these guys, we'll see under the UV map settings, there is a UV map, but it's the default UV map for a circle, which is what this started as. In other words, if I come over to the UV texture map and I select all the nodes for this, it'll show me where all those nodes are. And they're not there, not nodes, but vertices in this view here. They're not there, there's nothing there. So we need to unwrap it. And we can do that if we just come up to UVs here and choose a Smart UV project. It'll unwrap it, and now we see the top and bottom and all the sides of that cylinder, and that's where the texture is going to unwrap too. The problem is I want the icing and the cake to be in the same view, but also I don't care about putting texture on the top and bottom of this cylinder because I'm not going to render that part. So I want to deselect it. So if I am in edit mode and I shift select the bottom, let's turn off the icing temporarily, and I shift select the top and I unwrap that, Smart UV project, unwrap, you see we just have the sides now. So what I have selected is what unwraps. Now, there's some other issues that we'll have to look at, but with that in mind, we turn icing back on and I shift select icing. Then I can go into edit mode on both of them at the same time. Make sure that everything in the icing one is selected. So I'm going to select that individually. Go into edit mode, select all. But here's the other critical thing. It has a subdivision modifier on it. I have to actually apply that modifier so I can do this bake honestly with all the geometry. So with that modifier selected, I come over here and apply it. Now if I go into edit mode, we just see that geometry. If I was just rendering this for an animation, I wouldn't have to apply that, especially if I wasn't baking it. And there's other ways. You don't have to bake it. You could use that simpler geometry, but the way it bakes might not be as accurate. So anyway, with everything selected there and this selected, I go into edit mode, and now I have this cylinder and all the mesh for the icing selected. And so if I choose UV, Smart UV project, and I unwrap it now we see all the sides of the icing, and we see the sides of the cake. Now I also have the bottom of the icing selected. I probably don't need it, but I'll just keep it in there for the time being. All right, so does that make sense what we did here? We unwrapped both into one UV texture. Now if I select just the icing and look at it in the UV map, we only see the icing. But if I select the cake and I look at that, we just see where that cake is in the UV. They're two separate UV maps, but they're working together. Okay, so if you're building a character and you want like a costume for that character, this is one way you could have the different parts of the character being all in one texture. Now, there's also a more advanced type of UV mapping called UDIM tiles, where you can have multiple images for different parts of the same UV map. That's a lot more advanced, and we'll cover that maybe later. But that's how you can get high resolution for like the face and lower resolution for the shoes and things like that. So it's a bit much more efficient and advanced system for game design, but also for animation in general. Okay, so we have both elements selected. Let's come back over to shading. We have our texture, we have our blank image, we have new UV maps to bake, to coordinate the textures onto, and we're in cycles with GPU rendering. One more thing, I don't need 4096 samples. I think to be fast, I'll just do 128 and I'll turn off denoise. Because if denoise and samples are turned up that high, it'll use that much processing to bake the textures, which can take quite a while. So cycles, we scroll down to bake, and we see the bake option here. Notice that it says clear image on the output. That means it'll take whatever's here and delete it. So you can bake from multiple objects to the texture at different times, and that's a bit more advanced, but that's something that you can do if you want. So in other words, I'll bake the cake, then I'll bake the icing, then I'll bake something else, and we're baking a cake. So anyway, there's a lot of things that you can do. You can bake the direct as well as indirect lighting, the glossy, and you can bake all of these out to other files, and then you can compile that together for game engine. So it's pretty robust. But the process now, if I'm remembering correctly, is to bake. But one of the things I've noticed really helps, because there might be some wonkiness around these edges, is the margin. And that's how much around the edges of these islands are going to, the islands are, if we look at the UV map, the islands are these islands of meshes. And what it's going to do is it's going to draw pixels in all these areas and then output a little bit around that. So that way there's like no bleed over or whatever. But what I've noticed with this type of UV unwrapping is that sometimes if we have a large margin, it'll bleed into the other parts of the mesh. And so I'm just going to turn that down to 0 and see how that does. So I'm going to come back over to shading and make sure this margin is 0. And if we feel confident that we've got everything selected, we're in cycles, we've got both objects selected, we've got the texture set up, we can hit bake. So you'll see the texture bake is underway, and if it all works, when it gets done, we'll see it right there. What's that?
We're literally baking cake.
That's the irony of the whole thing. Yes. Okay. So now we see all the individual elements, and so we see the sides of the cake. The reason why these parts are black is because they're underneath the icing. Now, how do we actually see if this worked? We break our textures here. So one way to simply do that is we take our new bake texture, we disconnect the displacement map here, and we just plug the color straight into, without a shader, straight up to that. There might be some seams, and we can adjust that later, but for now I think it's fine for this project. Then we'll disconnect the displacement here, disconnect the original color, and then plug our image texture straight into it. So you see these edges right here? That is from not having any margin, because the UVs are getting stretched a little bit. So it might help me out to have like a 1 pixel margin, or change it from adjacent faces to extend and have like maybe this. I'll try it with just extend. But before I go any further, I got to plug it back up to test it. So I'll plug it in here, plug displacement in here, select this one, disconnect this, plug displacement back in, plug color back in. Select the texture here, select the texture here, shift select both, and bake it again. Save before you do. And now it baked one side, now it's baking the other side, or other object. Now it piled it all together. Then to test it, we'll just plug in the new image texture. Still see a bit, so we're going to increase this to 1. Make sure this is selected. Make sure this is selected. Bake. So after these are baked, you could put these models on 3D rendering sites like 3JS, Turbo Squid, and so forth, and you would have the actual 3D object with the displacements on a HTML viewer.
That's how I got the cam that I used for the last project, and I took that texture and I edited it in Illustrator,
That's better.
which is how I could have my own texture on it.
Excellent. All right, so we have it here, and we have it here. I'm going to extend this out 1 more pixel to make sure that we cover that whole edge. Make sure that's selected, and bake 1 more time. Save. All right, let's take this off. Take this off. Select this one. Take this off. Take this off. Plug this in. There we go. I don't like that seam there, but I'm just going to deal with it for now. There's still a little bit of a seam there. I can probably increase the pixel size on it, but for the most part, it's baked on. And if I go into solid view, you'll see that it's there. And the bottom of it looks like this because we didn't unwrap those areas, but I'm not planning on showing the bottom of the cake, so that's why it doesn't matter so much. Yeah, Aiden. Yeah, I could add a margin to the islands, and that might help what you're doing. So there's a lot of different settings that we could do, but you're right, it was bumping those islands right up against each other, and so that might not be helping us. And you can manually move those islands around after it unwraps if you want to. And that might help this situation that I have here as well. But I'm just going to go with this for now. And maybe one thing that I might want to change is maybe I want to draw onto this and say, like, leave a message or something, right? How would I go about doing something along that line? What I'm going to do is I'm going to create another blank image. So save. And if you like this image, then you might want to save it out. So if you're happy with this, just click on this guy, go to Image, Save As, and then in this folder, we'll just call it Plain Icing. And you can make it a PNG or whatever you want. Now let's go over here again to this one. It doesn't matter where I put it. You know what? It does matter because I want to put it on icing. So I'm just going to make another blank texture. I'll call this writing. 2048 by 2048, new image. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually plug this image up to the surface of this guy temporarily. And the reason we're doing that is it's using the same UV map that this icing has. But if we come over to texture paint, what I can do is if I am in texture paint mode, I can draw. Let's make this white. I can draw here, and you see it's actually putting it into the image. And if you've got like a Wacom tablet, you can turn on pressure sensitivity, and you can have it's like a pretty effective and fast drawing tablet, but you're drawing directly onto the surface of objects. So anyway, I'm just going to make this small and draw with my mouse. Like it's a consolation cake. All right. So all right, and then maybe let's just draw some like flowers or something. And maybe one more here. Maybe make some fun designs. This is awful, I know. But all right, so we've got a message there, and it's beautiful. And you can design this in like, because you can export these UV maps here, you can export those to Photoshop or Illustrator, and then you can just design it there if you wanted to, as long as you know where these islands are. And so once that image is made, we don't use that image directly, we can use it to transition between other elements, right? And so here, let's do this. Let's go back to the shading tab. And we've got rip right there. We'll disconnect that. We'll put our texture back in, but what we're going to do is we're going to switch between two different elements here. So let's actually use the BSDF this time. Let's plug color up to this and then plug that back up so that we have the texture back, but it is responding to light and shadow a little bit. And then let's use a mix shader. Mix shader. Where are you? There you are. Okay. And then let's plug this one up into it. And so the reason it's black is because there isn't anything plugged into the other one here. And so if we just duplicate this guy, plug this into the other side, no, it's compiling it. It'll take a moment. Then we can change the color to whatever we wanted. So, so let's make that something with contrast. And then if we want, we can make that area have a different sort of contrast. You can even add a little bit of displacement, but that won't really create anything. But this is a way that you can control the lighting and shading to that if you wanted to. And you could also bake this down to another level. So now that that is all working together to make that sort of texture, then we can bake that to a brand new texture using the same process that we did before. So again, let's create a new texture, image texture, new, we'll call it Bake 3, 2048 by 2048. And then we'll copy that one to this one. It's not really necessary, but again, I want them both on the same texture. So we'll paste that in here. Make sure it's selected with a white border. Bake 3, select both. And right now I'm looking at it in the material preview, so let's go over to cycles. You can see it's a little bright, so I'm going to make my world a bit darker, 0.2, so it shows up a little bit better. And if you need to play around with your exposure or whatever, you could. And then with both of those selected, come back over to bake and bake again. That was my phone, not the oven saying it's done. There we go. So now we see the textures are all baked into one new map. And so I can just take both of those and plug them into the output texture here and plug this one to the output texture here. And now we've got one simple texture with that level of complexity. So knowing this, you can just build on that and build that level of complexity up if that's something you're interested in doing. Does that make sense? All right, good. Save. And then if you want, you can go to File, External Data, and then automatically pack the resources. So then all these images are now packed into the blend file. I haven't saved them individually, but they're saved into the blend file. And then if you drop that into Godot, just the .blend, you'll have the cake in Godot with the color and all the writing and everything on it. Does that make sense? Or you can just use it this way and sell it as an asset. It's not a very good cake, but you get the idea. I'm going to do one more thing, just in case you were interested. I'm going to disconnect this guy. I'm going to disconnect this and just put this right here. So that way I just have this cake right here. Go to Layout, and let's just add one more thing here. Instead of writing it like I did, which is nice and low poly, if you wanted to make something a bit higher poly, here's what you might do. I'm going to look straight down on it, and I'm going to add a Bezier curve. Bezier curve. And the reason I'm adding a Bezier curve is that it's 3D by default. And it should be, where is it? Is it inside of it? I might have made my cake too big, but I'm going to go, let's turn off the cake for a second. Yeah, there it is. I'm going to go into edit mode on the curve. There it is. And I'm going to delete both vertices, X. All right, and then what I'm going to do, because right now I have a Bezier curve, but it has no vertices points, nothing. I'm going to look straight down, use my pen tool, and I'm going to draw onto the surface of objects. And I'll do that same thing that I did before. I'm going to write rip, but it's drawing a curve. And it might be better to do it as one, if you can get away with it, as one shape like that. Rip. It's easier to control. So you can see it drew it right on the surface because I had surface selected. Once I have that on the surface, then I can come over to the geometry settings and I can come over to bevel and give it a bit of a depth. So let's try 0.01, 0.05, too big, 0.05, there we go. And let's turn on fill caps, so it's like that, all right? Let's just move it around a little bit. And there's a bit of some wonkiness here with the geometry. I think it's created an extra vertices that I don't need here. So I'll just select it and choose to dissolve it. There we go. So making some like icing, but it's kind of boring, right? And if you look at other cakes, the icing has grooves and stuff. So we can change the bevel. So let's select it over here. And under the bevel, we'll give the bevel a profile. And by default, the profile is just this straight line. And you could choose these default profiles like a cornice molding, or, and this is great for, like it says, molding, crown molding, or steps. So you see what the steps look like. And if we have steps on there, this is what is defining the steps. If we go back to default, we can just draw our own curves and add different points on this. And we can start to make it look a little bit more like it's one of those things that's been squirted out, right? And so you just got to play around with this curve until you get the sort of look that you're going for, depending on what you want. And you can add more points on here that aren't there. And you just play around with it until you get something that is kind of like what you want. But here's where things get really fun. If I go straight down on it again, and I'm trying to keep it low poly, but if you wanted to have something that was just a cake for an animation, this stepping here can be increased in the curve properties here if you increase the resolution of the curve itself. Now, I'm going to go back into edit mode on the curve, because one of the things that makes it look not very realistic is it's too even. So we can change the thickness of each vertices with this tool right here in edit mode. So if I select that vertex, I can change the width, select this one, make it squish in. Select this one, squish in as well. And if there isn't a point here that I can move, I can just select both and go to segments and subdivide. So now I've got another point here. I can make it thick. There we go. Select both of these, segments, subdivide. Maybe make it a little thicker here. Now it seems a lot more organic. And if you wanted to change the height of it on each one, you could just lower or heighten the height, depending on what you're doing. Does that make sense? And because it's all one curve object, if I step back into it and I'm in edit mode, I can just draw with the pen tool. I'll just draw some flower shapes here. It's really hard to use a mouse this small. Let's get smaller. All right, and then if we just draw, bloop, bloop, there we go. Have some flowery sort of shapes after we do it. After it's made, you can change the thickness of it or whatever you need to do. There we go.
How would you go about making the ends curve or round?
The curves of what?
Like how it's flat on the ends there, how would you make that like round?
Rounded?
Like if, instead of
A straight line?
instead of like sharp edges on the end of it,
Uh-huh.
it curves into
Well, you saw how I was tapering these areas, right? You could do that. You can also set a taper object. And most students cry when I show them taper objects because it's a little bit confusing, but here's how a taper object works. I'm getting hungry. Let's go to curve and add just another Bezier curve. If I move that Bezier curve up here so you can see it, that's the Bezier curve. If we select this object and we choose a taper object as, and it has to be another curve, is going to be this new Bezier curve, then we get some wonkiness. And what happens is the shape of this curve is determining the taper of the other curves. And because they're all the same curve, it affects all of them. So if I go into edit mode on this curve and I change the shape of it, notice how it changes the shape of the tapering on all the other objects. So you can use this for a fun tapering technique. And if I subdivide that and go to subdivide, and I move that curve in different ways, you can see what that's doing to the curve. So in that way, you can have it shrink and go down into different ways, and you can just control that until it does that. One nice thing is you can make a fun animation out of this as well. For example, if I turn on this object here, if I turn on map taper, and then on the mapping, where is that? Then I can just drag this slider, and it'll have the effect of making these guys all look like they're going and spraying out and being drawn onto the cake, which is a pretty fun effect. If map taper is not turned on, where are you? If that's not turned on, and I drag that slider, it'll just make a hard edge on all of it, which is also a good effect, depending on what you're trying to do. I use the map taper technique when I want to make vines growing. It's great for plant growth. And that's what its main intention was anyway. All right, this tutorial is over. Rip. Any other questions? 2 questions, and then I'll stop. Yes, Rebecca. Yep. So the baking example that I did now, I combined everything together, which I'm sure if anybody's watching this video, they're wincing, because normally you would want to separate the different elements, especially if it's for a game engine. You'd want the albedo, diffuse, you'd want the specularity, the roughness, the normal maps, all to be separate textures that you then bring into a proper game engine. But life is short, and I just wanted to make something really quick. And this would be fine for this kind of asset, unless someone really wanted all those details to be changeable and visualized. There's other ways of faking it. I should also note that if you're using the curves like this on the cake, those curves won't come over to Godot. It won't see the curves. So I would have to go to Object, Convert, and then Mesh. The problem with that, though, is that if I look at my object now, it's made out of 51,000 vertices instead of just 7,000. These curves create a lot more, make the asset a lot heavier, which wouldn't be ideal if it's just a cake, unless it's the main character of a game scene, right? And most systems could handle something like that to this level. And because it's just a white texture, baking it wouldn't be really necessary, but yeah. Good. One more question? No other questions? Nope. Okay. All right. Thank you then.